Have you ever wondered why so many older women quietly begin to resent their husbands? As they grow older, it's not something discussed openly at family gatherings or social events. Yet it's one of the most common emotional shifts in long marriages. Many women who once deeply loved their partners in their 30s or 40s find themselves feeling emotionally drained, unheard, or even invisible by their 70s. And it's not because they suddenly became difficult. It's because years of small disappointments, unmet needs, and emotional neglect slowly accumulated, like dust settling in a room no one ever cleans. If you've ever sensed an unspoken tension between older couples, you're not imagining it. Behind polite smiles and shared meals often lies a quiet ocean of resentment. Today, we're exploring the real psychological and emotional reasons some older women begin to dislike, and in some cases deeply resent, their husbands later in life. This isn't about blame. Resentment rarely grows from one major betrayal. It forms from hundreds of small wounds ignored over decades. If you're watching as a man hoping to understand your wife better, or as a woman wondering why you've grown distant from someone you once loved deeply, this is for you. Most resentment in long marriages doesn't begin with betrayal. It begins with emotional neglect. In the early years, many women give endlessly. They nurture, compromise, and place everyone else's needs ahead of their own. Over time, however, they begin to realize that emotional connection has quietly been replaced by routine. Laughter at the dinner table becomes silence in front of the television. Conversations shrink into practical updates about errands or appointments. The connection fades, often without the husband even noticing. For most women, it's not about grand gestures or romance. It's about feeling seen and valued. When emotional needs go unmet year after year, affection doesn't simply disappear. It hardens. That hardness often shows up as coldness, criticism, or withdrawal. The husband may feel confused and assume she has changed, when in reality, she is responding to years of emotional invisibility. A woman once told me, "I spent decades making sure my husband had everything he needed, his meals, his comfort, his routine. But I can't remember the last time he asked how I felt." That quiet absence of care becomes a wound that never fully heals. Over time, love turns into silent bitterness. When a woman feels invisible, she doesn't always argue. Eventually, she withdraws. She stops trying to explain herself. And once she stops reaching out emotionally, the distance often becomes permanent. By the time many husbands realize something is wrong, she has already detached inside. That's when resentment takes root, not from hatred, but from deep disappointment that never had a voice. Many marriages could have survived with one simple habit: listening, not fixing, not lecturing, just listening. Because when a woman feels heard, she feels loved. When she feels ignored, she feels alone, even while sharing the same home. And loneliness inside a marriage is one of the heaviest burdens a person can carry. As years pass, many husbands forget that marriage still requires effort. They assume that because they've stayed together this long, the work is done. But love in later life is like a garden. When it's no longer tended, resentment grows. For many women, that neglect feels like a loss of respect. When a man stops trying, stops showing appreciation, stops being curious, or stops caring for himself. It sends a quiet message that she may interpret as, "You're no longer worth the effort." Even if that was never his intention, the impact remains. Respect fades when one partner feels taken for granted. What once felt like partnership begins to feel like servitude. Many older women don't crave romance anymore. They crave recognition. A thank you, a kind word, a moment of attention. When those disappear, emotional safety disappears with them. Over time, admiration fades, and resentment takes its place. In long marriages, the burden of responsibility often becomes uneven. The wife manages the home, raises children, supports grandchildren, and later becomes the caregiver. For years, she may not complain. She may even feel proud of being dependable. But as she grows older and more tired, that imbalance begins to feel deeply unfair. It's not just physical work that exhausts her. It's the invisible mental load. Planning meals, remembering appointments, maintaining family connections, carrying worry for everyone else. When she sees her husband enjoying the comfort she created without acknowledging her effort, that comfort begins to feel like injustice. This resentment doesn't arrive suddenly. It builds slowly, draining affection bit by bit until one day she realizes she no longer wants to repair what has worn her down for decades. Silence in long relationships rarely means peace. It often means surrender. As marriages age, communication often shifts from connection to conflict. Over time, frustration hardens into contempt. Arguments stop being about solutions and become outlets for years of unspoken resentment. Tone replaces understanding. Sarcasm replaces sincerity. Eventually, both partners stop trying to truly hear each other. Many women reach a point where they no longer argue to be understood. They argue because they've carried frustration for too long. When a woman feels her voice no longer matters, she doesn't just stop talking. She loses respect. And without respect, affection cannot survive. One elderly woman once said, "It's not the arguments that broke me. It was the silence afterward, when I realized he didn't care enough to even try." That silence is often interpreted as emotional abandonment. Yet even late in life, healing is still possible. It begins with humility. When one partner listens without defensiveness and apologizes without excuses, something softens. Many women don't want control or perfection. They want acknowledgement. In later years, emotional warmth becomes more important than ever. When affection fades and tenderness disappears, the marriage doesn't end loudly. It grows cold. Many women feel emotionally abandoned while still sharing the same bed. Presence without attention feels like absence. A gentle touch, a kind word, or genuine interest can bring warmth back into a relationship that feels lifeless. Emotional neglect often looks like indifference, but indifference cuts deeper than anger because it signals that caring has stopped. As life slows down, many couples lose their shared sense of purpose. Careers end. Children move on. The structure that once held the marriage together disappears. What remains is either connection or emptiness. For many women, this is when they realize their husband feels more like a roommate than a partner. They don't mourn what was lost. They mourn what never truly existed. But it's never too late to create new purpose together. It doesn't need to be grand. It only needs to be shared. Love doesn't fade because of age. It fades because people stop growing together. When they begin again, even late in life, the heart still responds. In every long marriage, love must evolve. What begins with passion must grow into understanding. When growth stops, resentment fills the space. Small neglects become great distances. But kindness compounds too. A single act of care, repeated consistently, can soften even years of bitterness. If you recognize these patterns, take heart. Awareness means there is still something worth saving. Begin gently. Listen honestly. Because love isn't about avoiding mistakes. It's about returning to each other again and again despite them. Thank you for being here. Share one thing you learned today and how you plan to use it in your life. Your thoughts matter, and reading your comments truly motivates us. If you found this meaningful, please like, subscribe, and share. We look forward to seeing you again.